Hello everyone, welcome to Rachel's Chatroom. So I'm Rachel and today I've got a very special guest. Her name is Rebecca Jo-Rushdy and she is Malaysia's first certified KonMari consultant. And today she will be sharing with us how to Marie Kondo your life and spark joy. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for coming onto my show. Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for inviting me today. And thank you so much for connecting with me over Instagram as well. When you messaged me, I was so excited to hear about your KonMari journey as well. So I'm sure we can chat more about that in the interview today as well.
Yes, definitely. So Rebecca, we've seen Marie Kondo all over the headlines with the KonMari Method, and you've got first-hand experience with the KonMari Method. So could you share with the viewers, what is the KonMari Method?
So the KonMari Method is actually very different from traditional ways of organizing that you might have seen on Netflix or online as well. So it's a very introspective Japanese art of decluttering. So it's actually, it actually takes us, it reverses the way that we approach decluttering. Oftentimes we look at it as in we have to throw. But actually what we're doing is we are doing it in an introspective manner so that we are surrounding ourselves with joy. We are choosing joy. So that's one of Marie Kondo's tagline as well, which is choose joy. She had written, her book is called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And that was written, and the English version was translated over 8 years ago. And that was a runaway success as well. So that's how I got into my own personal KonMari journey. When I read the book, I realized, because I actually come from a very tidy, organized family. Like my mom is it's like almost veering on OCD, but that's the kind of environment that I grew up in. And both my parents grew up in Japan as well. So they have that discipline about them. They have those mannerisms about them as well. Like they know how to take care of the space and everything, because it is a very, I would say it's a very cultural thing as well for KonMari, because, like Japanese people, like typically you're raised to respect your space. So, and then to do all things with a sense of pride. So whatever that you're doing, whatever task that you're doing, to do it with pride, which is why you often see, like, Japanese public facilities are world renowned for their cleanliness. Whether you're in a toilet or in a school or on a train, like everyone from around the world is like in awe over how clean it is, right? And then that's just ingrained in the culture. So with the KonMari Method, she does infuse a lot of positive psychology into it, because what we're doing is we are looking for the positive in our life. It's like, what do you want to keep in our life, rather than approaching it from what do I want to get rid of, like I just want to throw, like just focusing on the negative. That's like a very negative mindset. And as humans, we all have that negativity bias. Like anything that happens, and that's like the judgment inside of our brain, right? Whatever that happens, most of the time people are always looking at worst case scenario, or like, oh, that's impossible, that can't happen. So what I have found with the method is that when you're practicing in your own home, you're asking yourself, does it spark joy? It sounds really kooky at first, like to some people it sounds really funny, but actually you can change the terminology. If spark joy doesn't actually resonate with you, you can say, does it serve a purpose?
Right.
Like, does this mug serve a purpose, right? Or like, does this poster, does it serve a purpose as well? And then so you can really truly ask yourself and answer honestly as well, and then define your own joy. So by practicing in our own home, and when we have this mental state of mind where we're able to start looking at everything through the lens of gratitude, because her method is also rooted in gratitude, because we have to be grateful for everything that surrounds us. Especially if it's something we're letting go of, we have to reflect on what's the lesson that it taught us as well. So then, like, that's where the reframing of our mind begins.
Right. Is that what you call joy checking? I know you do that with your family, right? Like every 3 months or so. Is this something you encourage people to do as well?
It's actually, it's mental fitness. Just like how you finished your tidying festival, you got your foundation down, but you need to keep on exercising. It's the same with, like, you do an exercise, right? Like you do like a 30-day like yoga challenge, but after that 30 days is done, it doesn't mean that, oh, okay, I'm done, I don't have to ever exercise again, right?
True.
So I always compare it to like fitness as well, because we have to keep on practicing it. We have to keep on exercising our joy checking muscles. And as humans, like, you told me that you did it in January for your own personal KonMari. So now September. So what you kept back in January, some things may not serve a purpose anymore. Because as humans, we keep on evolving and changing. So it's just a great way to check in on ourselves, to be like, oh, okay, like, I needed that then. Now I no longer need it. It's already served its purpose.
It's true. Yeah, and it really helps to have a good sense of purpose for things that you have around you. You don't buy things just because it's cheap or whatever. You buy it because it makes you happy, right? Because it sparks joy. Right. It brings me to my next point. How is it different from the concept of minimalism, which is also a popular concept that has been catching on?
Yes, and there's a lot of great groups on it too. So, but that's one of the biggest myths of KonMari. People associate minimalism with KonMari. So, but actually it's completely different. So the KonMari method is all about surrounding yourself with joy, defining your own joy, and to be able to declutter and to transform your space into a sanctuary, because it's surrounding yourself with joy, right? If minimalism sparks joy for you, go for it, but you can absolutely be a maximalist and also KonMari too. So it's like if you love all of those, like a lot of decorative items, you like lots of prints and all those kinds of things as well, and it all honestly sparks joy for you, then that's fine. That's your definition of joy, but not if it's going to be like, sometimes people will be like, I don't need to KonMari, like everything sparks joy, right? Like
exactly. I was about to ask, how do you balance?
Exactly. So that's the excuse, right? Like some people, they use it as an excuse not to confront the things that they have. Like it is very confronting because it does feel daunting. You feel like, oh my gosh, I have to like check everything. I'd rather just not look at it. I'd rather just not prioritize it as well. But it's like what you were sharing with me just now too, like how you said, okay, I finally have that time. Like we met at the online workshop, right? Like the common ground. And so like you just have that sense, you're like, okay, it just needs to be done. It's kind of like, and again, I love comparing to exercise because it's like I struggle with exercise.
Same here.
So you're like, oh, like I should do it, I need to do it, but then wishing and wanting is not the same as doing. So rather than saying like, oh, I need to exercise, it's like I'm going to exercise today.
That's true. That is a big difference. And I noticed that based on my experience, it's actually more than a physical thing. It's not just clearing things up, tidying. It does affect me mentally and emotionally as well. Like you have a better sense of clarity. So I would also like to hear your personal experience or maybe your client's experience. How has the KonMari method actually help you or your clients overcome a specific challenge? I think you mentioned in one of your previous interviews that it helped you overcome the fear of public speaking.
Oh yeah, that's my own personal journey, right? Like I feel like the main thing is when your home is not a source of stress. And there's what I love about this is that there's so much research and data that supports this now. So just by simply seeing clutter, it's not like as if it's like being thrown in your face or anything like that. You're not physically getting hurt by it, but actually what happens is you're visually triggered. And then so when you see clutter in front of you, it raises your cortisol levels without you even realizing it. So there's that impact. So then like, with your heightened stress levels, it will impact your performance and your productivity as well, because you're not able to think clearly. And so like I always like to share during my workshops too, just 10 minutes of decluttering or even just cleaning. So like what I like to do is like I like to do the dishes because just doing it actually calms my mind. It gets me away from the screen, like especially if you have writer's block or you feel that downward dip in the afternoon as well. Step away from the devices and the screens, like just do something like decluttering or cleaning, and it will get you back to baseline. It will actually lower your cortisol levels too. So, and then this is where you can actually be more clear. You can gain that clarity you need to focus on the tasks ahead of you.
That's true. Yeah, it does really help. Like my mom is one of those people who are very tidy. I realize when she sees a mess, she's going to like get mad and she'll start shouting at people. So I think it's very powerful in that sense, the KonMari method, right? But how would you advise someone who has issues making time for it, or someone who has like many kids at home, especially during the season, you know, where everyone's working from home, what would your advice be or your recommendation? How should they get started without feeling too overwhelmed?
Yeah. I always say to set micro goals and just start. Take the first step, just start. Set micro goals, right? Because what happens is, you know, like small changes can lead to a big difference, and it can such a huge impact as well. Because when we look at it from like, oh my gosh, I need to declutter my entire life, you're going to feel really overwhelmed by it, you know. And then oftentimes people will get into that perfection paralysis, which means that, oh, if I can't do it all in one shot, I'm not going to do it all. It becomes almost like excuses and barriers as well. But whereas if you set micro goals, right? Like micro goals, I'm talking about, you know, like we talked about the KonMari Method. For people who are not familiar with it, we go by categories, not room by room. So let's say like there's 5 categories for a home. There's clothing, there's books, there's paper. Komono means miscellaneous in Japanese. So that's everything under the sun, from hobby items to cleaning products. And then the final one is sentimental items. So what happens is, okay, there's 5 categories, but then what I've actually provided is you can break it down into subcategories. So clothing, let's say that you're gonna, okay, do your swimwear today, do your socks today, do your shoes today, you know. So then it becomes much more manageable. You don't have to look at it from like, oh my gosh, I have to do my entire closet. Exactly. Everyone is different. I like doing it all in one shot because I feel that for me personally, once I get into that momentum, it gets faster. It's because I don't like to do things like start, stop. But for some people, if time is an issue, it's a limitation, then just start small. Like checking your t-shirts, for example, probably won't take more than 15 minutes to do.
Right.
Like, of course, depends on how much you have, right? And time yourself as well, because once you're able to recognize how long it takes you to do a category, then you can gauge how long it will take for you to do the other categories as well. And you can carve out the time, put it into a calendar, you know, like actually make an appointment with yourself. Okay, you know what? Like, okay, this is the speed I'm at. Based on the quantity of books I have, that means that I will need an hour and a half to complete my books, you know? Right. So then this helps us to be able to manage it more accordingly, because when we're able to put a number next to it, then it becomes like, you know, like for example, if someone tells you like, oh, you have to take a class, then you'll probably be like, oh my gosh, is it going to take a long time? But if they say like, oh, actually each video, this class is only 20 minutes long, you know, you'll be like, okay, like that's manageable. Like where can I slot it into my busy day? Yeah. You know, we also have to figure out our own obstacles as well, because the Marie Kondo's like KonMari Method, it's best practice, right? Like at the same time, we have to be able to personalize it for our unique situations too. I had a client where her obstacle was her mother-in-law. So we were finishing up her clothing category and she had her shoes to do, but her shoes were in her kitchen. Like, you know, it's in the storeroom next to the kitchen, but her mother-in-law was like in the kitchen all the time. And, you know, she didn't want to get impacted by her mother-in-law telling her she's being wasteful and all that kind of stuff. So we actually did it at 4 a.m. Like, it was virtual. So this was a virtual client. So then I was like, okay, I'll support you, you know? So she set up the time for like 4 a.m. She took it all out because that's before her mother-in-law wakes up. Her mother-in-law is in the kitchen by 6 a.m. So, and then we finished it, you know? So it really teaches us to become solutions driven too. Like, okay, this is an obstacle, but how can we design a solution? Right. Because there's always ways like, okay, kids, if you're busy with the kids all day, then maybe it's just carving out some time, like in the evening, like if you want it to be quiet time, or even waking up early.
Right. That makes sense.
So yeah. So then like, this is the way it's like, you know, not just having that fixed mindset and it's like a hard no. It's like, oh, I have kids, therefore I can't KonMari. It's like, no, let's reverse engineer it. Let's just figure out what are the problems, you know, like that's how I approached. At the end of the day, it's habit building. So that's how I approach my own exercise and meditation practice as well. Yeah. So I started off, I started waking up at 4:30, like when the first lockdown happened, because my kids wake up at 6 a.m.
Wow. Okay.
So I didn't really have a choice. And also it forced me to sleep earlier as well. So then it built on, it became like a habit
Yeah.
stacking of like good habits. And but it's also connecting to the why, right? Like for you, Rachel, as well, you were mentioning how you've tried decluttering before, and then, you were talking to your friend about it, where you will always hit an obstacle. And like, I'd love to know like what pushed you to be able to complete it this time as well?
I think it was just I kind of hit a point where I got sick and tired of being like just in a messy space all the time, because I think it affected me subconsciously on many levels, right? Because whenever I come back to my bedroom, like my clothes are everywhere, the miscellaneous items are everywhere, the books are everywhere. It's just like, oh, I'm done. I think this is where like the rule number one of the KonMari method comes in, that commitment, right? I think I was very intentional about it. And then I got into the momentum, and then I think I did it like continuously for a few weeks. Like every day I was just looking to clean up and tidy up more and more things I could. And then I felt like, wow, I actually eventually did it. And I thankfully, managed to kind of maintain that system. Yeah. Especially with, that's why I'm so happy that I attended your workshop, and I feel like more people should hear about it. I think it's definitely doable, because especially with my clothes, it's like every time I feel like, okay, you know what, I'm going to be good for like a week or two. And then the next minute it's back to like, the whole messy situation again. So I want like a proper system so I don't repeat this. So yes, it does work.
And like for you personally, like how long did it take for you to do the clothing, for example?
The clothing, I think I took about 3 days. Yeah, but maybe not consecutively, but it wasn't too stretched out. Yeah, because once I got into the momentum, I was like, okay, you know what? This is the stack of clothes where I need to donate. This is where I need to discard. I feel like clothing is also very sentimental, especially those given by like certain special people, like your family or your exes. And then I feel like I've been hoarding at least like 2 stacks of clothes for years. And I told myself, okay, like this is the stack where I'm gonna wear when I, like shed like 5 pounds or whatever, but it never happened. So that was the point. I felt like I need to get real and I need to do something about it. So yeah, I just had to accept reality and just be at peace with my decision.
Right. And so that's where like, it's like being able to process it as well. It's like, okay, I'm not defined by size. I'd rather be comfortable. I don't want to like squeeze myself into things that are uncomfortable. Like all those kinds of things. We come to those realizations, and then we actually are able to release all of these things that have been holding us back, almost like, it's societal conditioning, like media conditioning, all of these things that we are bombarded with from a young age. Like, it's like as young as the age of 7 or 8, then kids start to have those people-pleasing tendencies. And especially since we're in like Asian cultures as well, like we're brought up in Asian culture, you have that extra added pressure. There's that extra like cultural layer as well, because it's about like respecting your elders and all those kinds of things too. So then we're told like what to do, what to say, how to behave, what to wear from such a young age. And so that's why like I'm also very passionate about teaching kids as well. Like, most of the time people are like, oh, kids can't do this. So, again, adults always put the limiting beliefs onto children, but you will be so surprised to hear that children are easier to work with than adults. Because children usually, especially the younger children, they're so intuitive. They know exactly like, okay, this sparks joy, like, oh, this one, I really like the color, but then it's not comfortable. They're able to actually articulate it. So then it's not only about having a tidy home. It's really about like, let's just say from the perspective of a child, right? Like, so what we're teaching them is that to define their own joy, to be able to define what enough means. Like what does enough toys look like for you? Clothes look like. And then also to be able to let go with gratitude, to be able to give to others as well, because for us, like donation is a really big part of the practice too. They know that, okay, I'm ready to pass it on to someone. Like it's removing those hoarding tendencies. And also when they're able to articulate what joy means to them and to let go effortlessly, when they reach adulthood, they're going to be able to recognize toxic relationships. They're going to be able to have that strength to be able to walk away from jobs that don't serve them, So like all of these sorts of things, because and we all know people where when these issues are unresolved, like they don't have these sorts of tools within them, that we see so many adults who are completely miserable, right? Like you're job, you're completely miserable, like that you're in a relationship that's really toxic, but then you feel like, oh, you need to be in it, you basically tolerate a lot of these things.
Exactly.
But actually, like, so what we're doing is it's really about living life fully and vibrant as well. So yeah, it seems really basic, and I'm always like, no, it's so much more beyond the surface level. Like, of course, like having a tidy home that supports you, that's great, but it's more than that. So it's beyond the surface level. It's really about, like if your space supports you, then you have that focus to be able to focus on the things that you need to be able to take care of yourself with. Like maybe you need to have more bandwidth to be thinking about, okay, I need to get better about healthy eating. I need to get focused on my sleep habits or like exercise and stuff. And so when your home isn't a source of stress, then you're going to have that bandwidth increase so you can focus on the other things that really matter.
Yep, that's true. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting what you touched on earlier about kids. They're actually more certain of what they like, what they don't like. And I think it's because unlike adults, right? Most adults, we have been very much influenced by people around us, our customs, our traditions. And I feel like I've been like a victim of all these years. And this is where I feel like, hey, a lot of ideas actually did not originate from me. It's very much from, the culture and people around. Like you talked about, the obligations, the pressure and all that. And I think this is where the KonMari Method comes in, where you start, decluttering. And then even though it's like a physical act, but it kind of helps you. It influences like your emotions, your thought processes. Yeah, and I think it's really helpful. What are the common mistakes that you've seen in your clients when it comes to tidying things? Like, for instance, for myself, I remember I used to always tidy by location and not category. Is that quite common in most?
It's so common because people will just be like, okay, I'm going to do it drawer by drawer, which is great because at least it's like, I always say it's progress over perfection. Right. And we can always go back. Like my favorite Maya Angelou quote is like, do your best until you know better and then do better. We're constantly learning, right? Like, okay, I started with like the traditional way of organizing, but then once I learned about the KonMari method, I was like, oh my gosh, like I've been doing it the wrong way my whole life, because I've also been decluttering for people way before KonMari, and what I realized, that's the traditional way of organizing, which is I do it for people. But what I love about the KonMari method is that we are guiding people, we're teaching people how to do it, because that's empowering. It's like the whole parable of if you give someone a fish, then you're only going to provide them one meal. But if you teach them how to fish, then they're going to be able to feed themselves for a lifetime.
Exactly. Yeah.
So like, because I would declutter for people, and then within 3 days it will rebound. And it's not satisfying. So some consultants, they will do both, which is the traditional plus the KonMari. Like, some people, they have clients, they'll be like, can you just do it for me? Like, here's my keys. I'll see you in 3 hours. Like, you've seen those kinds of shows before. Right. But then the KonMari method is like, we do it with the client together, because I cannot define what joy is to you. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, so I'm just coaching to like help. Of course, we speed things up as well, because we're physically there to help you figure out the system, to fold it, and like also think of the donation plans as well. So it does speed things up considerably, but the client, or you have to be able to define joy for yourself. So even if people are like, how does this look on me? Like, when I think about this outfit, I'll be like, look in the mirror and what do you think? Like, I can't even say, oh, that looks great on you. Like I can't influence those decisions, because this is where your confidence builds up.
Right.
And so like how we're saying about the mistakes, number one is like people do it by the room, so then it's like, okay, so now we know, like, let's do it by the category, and let's talk about the whys behind it, because when we understand the reasoning behind it, it helps us to be able to connect with it and to run with it. So let's say, like, why do we do it by category? It's because when you have a clear mental audit of everything you own, like if you have like clothes here, there, and everywhere, you're not going to realize how many black t-shirts you have, because especially if it's here, there, and everywhere. But when you're able to collect it and put it together, you actually have that mental audit. You're like, okay, like this is how much clothes I have. This is how much swimwear I have. This is how much socks I have as well. This is where the future purchasing behaviors will also change because you're triggered by that visual. You're like, okay, I know how much clothes I have now. Like I know how much evening wear I have now. And then so next time, if you're online shopping or you go into a store and you see something cute, like you're like, oh, okay, that looks like a great dress. But you're like, okay, you know what? But I have like 6 similar dresses right now.
Yeah.
So this is not a need, it's a want. And that's how you can like really process and filter through and be like, okay, you know what? Like I appreciate this for its design, but I don't actually need it right now. And another thing I like to do with like online shopping is to just put it in the cart and then waiting on the wants as well. So that's also like a really nice little exercise to do for people who are like, I used to be a shopaholic. So for anyone who struggles with shopping, I am living proof that you can overcome your shopping tendencies. I realized that for myself. Why was I going to shopping from a young age? Like, why was I turning to that? Like filling that empty void, the bottomless pit as well. And what I realized was because it was a coping mechanism. It was a very unhealthy coping mechanism. And there's also like, you do get that dopamine hit from shopping. It's very short-lived, but you do get that happiness chemical too. So then this is why like we get addicted to certain behaviors, right? But then when we're able to realize that, okay, you know what, that's an unhealthy coping mechanism, but I now have all these other tools where you can actually empower yourself with rather than going the negative way. And I think it's also just the fact of like, oftentimes people just look at it from, like we mentioned earlier, they look at it from the big picture of having to declutter their entire house, decades upon decades of clutter that has been accumulated. And then that's where we end up stopping. So again, going by the micro goals, like for me, like when I started exercising again, I just did 10 minutes a day. And then I built it up. I was like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Now I'm up to 20 minutes a day and I'm happy with that. So it's really about like, okay, when something starts to feel comfortable, just like how you said, like you started KonMari and then you started to get addicted to that feeling as well. And then it becomes effortless, right? Like in the beginning, you might have felt like a bit like, your muscles haven't been moved yet. It feels harder. And then once it becomes easier, then this is when it becomes second nature. It's like even with joy checking, like, you start to perceive things really differently. Even just when you scan a room, then you're able to like, oh, is everything in its home? Is it where it belongs? And so because when you have a home identified for everything, that's another big mistake as well. I would say that's the mistake number 3, when you don't have a home for every item in your house. That's where the clutter will build up. So let's just say, for example, like, how does clutter build up? Okay, like this is the most typical way. Like, let's say, for example, like I am walking around with like all of these things. These don't have a defined home. So human nature, what we will all do is we will find a flat surface, any flat surface, and then
yeah, exactly.
And that's when the mountain starts to accumulate. So then it becomes that practice of every day. Like I actually do this with the kids. Like mess and clutter are 2 different things. Because mess is life. Like that's gonna happen, right? Like, but clutter, those are things that you don't need. So mess is easy to reset because you know exactly like, okay, this is where the headphones go. This is where the keys go. This is where the masks go. Okay, kids, put your toys back to its homes. I think it's really unhealthy to think that, oh, our homes have to look like what it looks like on social media, like on Instagram or Pinterest. Like, that's just a really unhealthy way of trying to live, especially if you have kids as well. So for us, it's like, like the house will get messy during the day. Right. But what we know is that we have that confidence at the end of the day. all the family, we all pitch in. And then we go and scan. We do like a scanning exercise. We scan around the house, pick up the things, and we put it back to where it belongs.
Right.
So this is also training, right? Because that's another question that I get very often. People will be like, oh, like, you know, my family members, they don't want to KonMari, you know, like I declutter, but they're not following it. And this comes through practice, like muscle memory. And if you do this every day with the family, to be like, okay, let's reset the house, let's put it back to where it belongs, which it doesn't take more than 15-20 minutes to do. And you're actually conserving energy, because I'm really big on energy management as well. So it's not about time management, you know, like we all have 4 hours in a day, but if you don't have the energy, then what you accomplish compared to someone who has a lot of energy in that 24 hours, it's going to look very, very different.
That's true.
So that's another reason why I'm so passionate about creating a sanctuary for your space, because your home shouldn't be a storage.
Right.
Your home is a sanctuary. It's a place where it supports you, it uplifts you, it re-energizes you. So which is why, like, there's also some terminologies as well, the KonMari terminologies, which is creating a power spot. So that's like an environment, like a room that gives you energy, you know, like all the things around, like it gives you joy. And another one is called joy plus touch. So it might not be a actual room, but like, you know, even just things like, oh, okay, like this could be a joy plus item. Because, you know, oh, it's like, oh, my best friend gave this to me. Like, it reminds me of like, oh, when we went to this shop to get it. Right? Like all these things, and it lifts you up. So which is why, like, when you surround yourself with joy, it actually re-energizes you, because just by seeing something, it gives you back those memories. Just like how you were saying, like your clothes is sentimental.
Yeah.
Right. So it might be good memories, it might be bad memories.
But
everything in our homes, it actually does hold a significance.
Yeah, true. Thank you so much for sharing all this information. I think a lot of people will feel inspired by all this. Like, there's hope for all the shopaholics, the hoarders like me before. Yeah, so I think just to recap, you know, start small, make it a habit, start off with like 10 minutes or so, and think of it like an exercise, right? Like an exercise routine. Just do a little bit day by day, and then you'll get better, right? Thank you so much, Rebecca. So for those who are committed and would like to, you know, consult you, where can they find you?
You guys can reach me through my website, which is sparkjoyandflow.com, or you can also find me on Instagram or Facebook. We actually do have a private Facebook group as well for people who want to go further in their journey and they need some community support too. So you can find that all through my Instagram. If you just follow that link, then it'll all show up there as well.
Awesome. So I will include all the links to Rebecca down below in the description. So please do follow her and give it a try. You know, it's really worth it. I mean, I am speaking from experience after attending one of Rebecca's online workshops, and it really helped me, and it has made such a big difference. So yes, and I think this is the best time to get started. You know, we're pushing the end of the year. Yeah, and then you want to start 2022 afresh. So all the best, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you once again, Rebecca, for coming on to my show. You're such an inspiration. This is Rachel's Chatroom. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you, Rachel.